This is the deep analysis of 1941, uncovering the deception that doomed the German autocrats' conquest of the East. We analyze the strategic failure of the massive Eastern invasion, scrutinizing how initial triumph curdled into decisive defeat. The shocking truth lies not just in the Russian winter, but in a lethal combination of arrogance and fundamentally flawed military planning. We examine the key strategic errors that prevented the seemingly invincible Wehrmacht from delivering the swift annihilation blow it sought. The invasion was predicated on the belief that the Soviet war machine was weak and unprepared for a complex modern conflict. The Soviet General Secretary was deceived by the 1939 Non-Aggression Pact, believing it secured crucial time to bolster his defense. The Kremlin leader ignored frequent explicit warnings from his own intelligence and communist spies fearful of contradictory reports. He dismissed information indicating an imminent invasion as mere saber rattling by the Reich leader clinging to the worn strand of hope. This catastrophic miscalculation led to an act of treachery unprecedented in the history of civilized nations, shocking the world. The Soviet leadership failed to raise forces to combat readiness, leaving troops dispersed and lacking vital communications at dawn. Many formations never received the final warning to avoid provocative actions, highlighting the shambolic state of Soviet communications. The failure to foresee the surprise attack resulted in the immediate loss of thousands of aircraft and catastrophic early casualties. Strategically, the German autocrat committed a massive blunder by delaying the launch of the operation until late June 1941. The diversion of forces to conquer Crete added crucial extra wear to vehicles pushing the offensive closer to the worsening autumn weather. This delay convinced the Soviet General Secretary it was too late in the year for the Reich leader to launch such a large-scale attack. The scope of the invasion was terrifyingly ambitious, aiming to reach the general line Volga-Archangel hundreds of miles away. Senior German officers, knowing history, were aghast at the operation's scope, fearing the autocrat had eschewed practical concerns for mysticism. Field commanders like Guderian knew that others had tried to overwhelm Russia and failed, citing the historical campaigns of Napoleon III. The goal of destroying the bulk of the Red Army west of the Dvina and Dnieper rivers proved to be fatally overconfident within 2 weeks. The autocrat's decision to split Army Group Center, diverting forces south, fatally undermined the drive towards the capital Moscow. This divergence of strategic focus, driven by Hitler's impatience, cost valuable time and momentum, interrupting the campaign timetable. The ultimate operational failure was neglecting logistics. The Wehrmacht lacked the resources for a campaign extending considerable distances. The Reich leader's confidence ignored the geographical reality that Russia's vastness would swallow even the most powerful attacking force. Despite immense tactical victories like the encirclement of Minsk, the enemy's command and control was shattered, but its body was not killed. What truly saved the Soviets was a core resilience, patriotic fervor, driven by the invaders' brutality, transforming it into a patriotic war. The invaders legitimized the Kremlin leader's harsh rule in a way he never could, turning easygoing people into spiteful, vengeful mujiks. The vast scale of Wehrmacht atrocities, coupled with the Commissar order, fundamentally mobilized the occupied population against the Germans. Partisan groups operating behind enemy lines became the face of the party in occupied territory, disrupting communications and morale relentlessly. Even the early purges of the Soviet military, though destructive, paradoxically ensured commanders remaining were loyal to the General Secretary's regime. The German failure to tap into significant anti-Soviet sentiment in 1941 was a massive political oversight, cementing Russian national unity. The most critical strategic defense involved the massive evacuation and restoration of over 1,500 factories far east of Moscow by November. This forward thinking, along with the necessary scorched earth policy, provided the essential foundation for long-term Soviet resistance. The Soviet General Secretary's central dictum was that the route to victory lay in eventually outproducing Germany, leveraging vast resources. The Germans, though tactically superior, were forced to reckon with the massive leap in Soviet heavy industry capacity achieved in the 1930s. The Soviet war machine possessed awesome numbers on paper, but was riddled with inadequacies brought about by rapid expansion and terror. The German autocrat failed to recognize the new robust relationship existing between the Soviet General Secretary and his subservient growing military. The Wehrmacht's assumption that the enemy would collapse quickly failed, because Soviet troops were instructed to stand firm and fight to the last round. Leadership at the front, although initially chaotic, hardened quickly. Pavlov's execution served as a brutal, unmistakable warning to others. The introduction of political commissars and merciless purges of personnel arrested those spreading rumors or indulging in defeatist rhetoric. This process, though bloody, was intended to stiffen the resolve of the troops who had an average frontline tour of duty of just 3 weeks. The autocrat miscalculated the logistical impact of the early winter trucks. Broke-down trains were halted, and men suffered immediate frostbite. The infamous Russian mud season, or Rasputitsa, turned cart-and dirt roads into impassable marshland, consuming vehicle momentum in late 1941. Supply lines stretched precariously thin. Divisions lacked basic food, ammunition, and winter clothing, undermining the attack on Moscow. The German autocrat planned for the Red Army to be destroyed in 1941, but the failure condemned the Wehrmacht to enter a second year of fighting. The realization dawned across the German high command that they would have to face the ideological and military wrath of the Soviets alone. The inability to achieve the Vernichtungsschlacht, the annihilation of enemy forces through a single crushing blow, was the strategic failure of Barbarossa. The autocrat sought Blitzkrieg to avoid the protracted, bloody, and resource-sapping fighting he had experienced during the Great War and failed. By December 1941, the German autocrat was forced to assume personal command, having sacked dozens of senior generals for their supposed lack of vigor. This action underlined the new dangerous relationship between the executive and the military, no longer a team, but a master and a servant. The autocrat's increasing interference, combined with his refusal to allow tactical retreats, led peaked generals to believe his military thinking reckless. The sheer scale of Soviet losses, though staggering, was mitigated by the nation's 190 million population, providing an endless pool of replacement bodies. Furthermore, Lend-Lease aid, particularly from 1943 onward, was providing essential aircraft, guns, and vehicles, fueling Soviet resistance. The German autocrat's decision to declare war on the United States in December 1941 further ensured Germany would fight on multiple powerful fronts. This compounded the critical situation as strategic momentum was forever lost, forcing the Wehrmacht into a defensive, resource-draining battle. Consider the counterfactual. Had the invasion commenced earlier and focused solely on Moscow, ignoring Ukraine's resources, could the autocrat have won? The delay and the diversion proved fatal, allowing the Kremlin leader just enough time to stabilize his defenses and prepare for the long war. The crucial strategic lesson, logistics, and the vastness of the theater trumped Germany's initial tactical and technological advantages in the field. The German deception created temporary shock, but the subsequent failure to achieve the political objective solidified the resolve of the Soviet people. The autocrat's mystic conviction of his own infallibility blinded him to the stark limitations imposed by geography and the reality of attrition warfare. The failure of the invasion meant the world would witness a protracted conflict culminating in the complete ruin and destruction of the German Reich. The deception that began Barbarossa was a gamble. When the Red Army failed to collapse, the game was immediately and irrevocably lost. The autocrat's military thinking, though successful in the West, was profoundly ill-suited for the sheer scale and tenacity encountered in the East. We see a clear contrast in leadership styles, arrogance of a dictator, versus the determined, though often ruthless, resolve of the Soviet General Secretary. The deception was effective operationally for 10-30 seconds, the critical period when air superiority and ground command were immediately neutralized. Yet this operational shock failed to translate into a permanent strategic advantage as Soviet defense layers absorbed the mechanized thrust. The deception led to the greatest military miscalculation of the war, believing a totalitarian regime could not sustain a total defensive conflict. The vast battlefield debris and carnage visible to advancing German infantry immediately underscored the brutal totality of the new war. German infantry marching eastward felt a confident surge, but soon realized they were constantly getting farther from loved ones and sufficient supply. The sheer human cost to the Soviet Union, hundreds of thousands overrun, failed to diminish the Kremlin leader's commitment to annihilate the enemy. The shock of the invasion was soon replaced by the shared visceral hatred of the German occupiers, forging an unbreakable national will. This massive conflict fundamentally shifted the global balance of power and ultimately guaranteed the Western Allies' eventual victory in Europe. The colossal losses suffered by the Wehrmacht in 1941 meant that resources were diverted permanently from other strategic objectives like the West. The deception's fallout included the humiliation of commanders who warned against the attack, highlighting the danger of dissent in authoritarian systems. If the autocrat had heeded the professional advice of men like Guderian, the strategic objective would have been focused and achievable. Instead, the autocrat's hubris guaranteed a two-front war, forcing Germany to fight with a resource-deficient, overstretched military machine. The legacy of the 1941 deception is the pivotal failure to secure vital oil resources, which were critical for the Wehrmacht's long-term operational mobility. We must acknowledge that the scale of this deception and the resulting clash forever defined the brutality and outcome of the Second World War. The German autocrat promised his colleagues Russia would collapse in 3 months. Instead, the conflict became a nightmare spread over weeks and years. The shock of 1941 taught the Soviets a harsh lesson, leading to the development of highly effective, deeply echeloned and resilient defensive systems. The 1941 deception revealed an irreversible truth: ideology cannot defeat the brutal logic of strategic geography and logistics in a total war.